The massive classroom buzzed with excitement as students from across the galaxy settled into their seats. The room could hold 500 beings, and today it was completely full. Creatures of all shapes and sizes filled the curved rows of benches. Some had wings, others had tentacles, and a few glowed with their own inner light. Professor Vex-High Thornwick walked to the center of the room. He was tall and thin, with silver-blue skin that shimmered under the lights. 4 arms moved gracefully as he arranged his teaching materials on the floating desk. His large, dark eyes scanned the eager faces of his students. "Welcome, students, to today's special lecture," Professor Thornwick said. His voice was smooth and carried easily through the room. "Today we will discuss one of the most amusing myths in our galactic history. We will talk about the legendary species called humans." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. In the front row, a student with crystal skin raised one of her many arms. "Professor, are these the same humans from the old stories that parents tell children to make them behave?" "Exactly right, Zixtal," the professor replied with a smile. "The very same fictional creatures that supposedly lived on a planet called Earth." Professor Thornwick pressed a button on his desk. A large hologram appeared above his head, showing a strange bipedal creature. It had pale pink skin, small eyes, and only 2 arms and 2 legs. The creature stood upright on its hind legs, like some kind of primitive beast. The students burst into laughter. A blob-like student in the middle section jiggled with amusement. "Professor, that thing looks so fragile. How could it possibly survive in space?" "An excellent question, Gloophigh." Professor Thornwick chuckled. According to the myths, these humans were supposedly one of the weakest species in the universe. They had no natural armor, no ability to photosynthesize their own food, and no way to regenerate lost body parts. The hologram changed to show the supposed human homeworld. It was a blue and green planet with white clouds swirling around it. The professor pointed at the image with one of his 4 hands. The stories claimed that humans lived on a single planet, and somehow managed to survive in one of the most dangerous environments imaginable. They called it a death world, covered mostly in poisonous water that they somehow needed to drink to stay alive. More laughter filled the room. A tall, insect-like student clicked his mandibles together in amusement. "Professor Thornwick, surely no intelligent species would be foolish enough to live on such a world." "That's what makes this myth so entertaining." "Clicktar," the professor replied. "The stories get even more ridiculous. Humans supposedly had to eat other living creatures to survive, instead of simply absorbing nutrients from their environment like civilized beings." The hologram shifted again, now showing artistic depictions of human activities. One image showed humans apparently attacking and killing large 4-legged creatures. Another showed them cooking the meat over an open flame. According to legend, Professor Thornwick continued, humans were so primitive that they actually used fire to prepare their food. Fire! Can you imagine any intelligent species playing with such a dangerous and uncontrolled force? A student with feathered wings spread them wide in amazement. "But Professor, wouldn't that burn their living spaces down?" "The myths claim they somehow learned to control it," the professor said with a dismissive wave of his upper right hand. "But we all know how impossible that would be for any real species." The image changed once more, showing humans, apparently, living in groups. They seemed to be building structures out of stone and metal, working together in large numbers. Perhaps the most unbelievable part of the human myth is their supposed social structure, Professor Thornwick said. The stories claim that humans lived in massive groups called cities, sometimes containing millions of individuals, all crammed together in a small space. The students gasped in disbelief. Most civilized species lived in small, peaceful communities, where everyone had plenty of space and resources. "It gets worse," the professor continued with obvious enjoyment. "Humans supposedly formed something called governments, where a few individuals would make decisions for all the others. And when these governments disagreed, humans would engage in something called war." The word war caused a shocked silence in the classroom. War was a concept so alien to most galactic species that they had trouble even understanding what it meant. A young student with tentacles for arms raised one appendage nervously. "Professor, What exactly is war? Professor Thornwick's expression became serious for a moment. According to the myths, war was when large groups of humans would deliberately try to kill each other using weapons and tools designed specifically for causing harm. The classroom erupted in horrified gasps and nervous chatter. The idea of deliberately harming another intelligent being was almost incomprehensible to most of the students. Surely that's the most ridiculous part of the myth, said Zixtal, her crystal body flashing with different colors as she processed the information. No species could survive if they spent their time fighting each other. Exactly my point. Professor Thornwick nodded approvingly. This is why we know humans could never have existed. The myths describe a species that was violent, short-lived, weak, and dependent on consuming other life forms to survive. Such creatures would have destroyed themselves long before they could develop any kind of civilization. The hologram changed to show supposed human technology. Crude metal vehicles with wheels, simple aircraft with fixed wings, and spacecraft that appeared to be powered by controlled explosions. The technology described in human myths is equally impossible, the professor explained. Instead of using clean energy sources like fusion or antimatter, humans supposedly built machines powered by burning fossil fuels and chemical reactions. Gloophai wobbled with laughter. Professor, wouldn't that poison their atmosphere? According to the stories, it did, Professor Thornwick replied. The myths claim that humans actually damaged their own planet's environment through their technology, yet somehow survived and even thrived. A student with multiple eyes blinked all of them in confusion. But Professor, if they poisoned their own world, how could they possibly develop space travel? They couldn't, the professor said firmly. That's exactly why these stories are nothing more than entertaining fiction. No species could be so self-destructive and still achieve technological advancement. The hologram now showed artistic depictions of supposed human emotions, images of humans with water leaking from their eyes, others with their mouths open wide showing their teeth, and some embracing each other with their arms. The emotional descriptions in human myths are particularly amusing, Professor Thornwick said. Humans supposedly experienced something called crying, where they would leak salt water from their eyes when distressed. They also engaged in laughter, making loud noises when amused, and physical contact for comfort. The students found this hilarious. Most advanced species communicated emotions through color changes, pheromones, or telepathic sharing. The idea of physical expressions was primitive and amusing, but perhaps the most entertaining aspect of human mythology, the professor continued, is their supposed relationship with other species on their planet. The stories claim that humans actually tamed wild predators and kept them as companions. The hologram showed images of humans with four-legged creatures that had sharp teeth and claws. The humans appeared to be touching these dangerous animals without fear. The myths call these creatures dogs and cats, Professor Thornwick said with obvious amusement. Supposedly, humans took apex predators and turned them into pets that lived in their homes and even slept with their offspring. The classroom exploded with laughter. The idea was so absurd that several students had to steady themselves to avoid falling from their seats. This concludes the most basic overview of human mythology, Professor Thornwick said, as the laughter died down. Next week, we will examine other impossible species from galactic folklore, including the legendary warriors called Spartans and the mysterious builders known as Romans. As the students began to pack their belongings, none of them noticed the small metal object that had just appeared on the Academy's long-range sensors, moving toward their planet at impossible speed. Professor Thornwick cleared his throat and waited for the classroom to settle down. The students were still chuckling about the ridiculous idea of humans keeping predators as pets. He smiled at their amusement and activated his holographic display once more. Now that we have covered the basic impossibilities of human existence, he said, let us explore some of the more disturbing aspects of these myths. What I am about to show you may seem shocking, but remember that these are just stories, created to entertain and frighten. The hologram changed to show crude drawings of humans performing strange activities on themselves. One image showed a human lying on a table, while another human appeared to be cutting into its body with sharp metal tools. According to human mythology, when these creatures became injured or sick, they would perform something called surgery, Professor Thornwick explained. Instead of simply regenerating damaged tissue like any sensible species, humans would actually cut open their own bodies and attempt to repair the damage manually. The students gasped in horror. Zixtal's crystal body flashed bright red with shock. Professor, that sounds like torture. Why would any creature willingly harm itself? The myths claim it was their form of medicine, the professor replied with obvious disbelief. Humans supposedly learned to transplant organs from one individual to another, replace damaged body parts with artificial components, and even inject themselves with weakened diseases to prevent stronger ones. Gloophide jiggled with nervous laughter. That makes no sense at all. Why wouldn't they just grow new parts naturally? Because, according to the stories, humans could not regenerate, Professor Thornwick said. When they lost a limb or damaged an organ, it stayed damaged forever. This supposed limitation forced them to develop these barbaric medical practices. The hologram shifted to show humans engaged in various physical activities. Some were running very fast. Others were lifting heavy objects, and still others appeared to be hitting each other with padded gloves. Even more bizarre are the human myths about recreation, the professor continued. Humans supposedly created something called sports, where they would deliberately put themselves in danger purely for entertainment. The images showed humans throwing themselves through the air, crashing into each other at high speeds and competing to see who could endure the most physical punishment. One sport called football involved humans wearing armor and running into each other as hard as possible, Professor Thornwick explained. Another, called boxing, required two humans to punch each other in the face until one of them could no longer continue. A student with multiple arms raised 3 of them at once. Professor, why would anyone choose to be hurt for fun? The myths suggest that humans enjoyed testing their physical limits, the professor replied. They apparently believed that deliberately putting themselves in danger would make them stronger and more capable. Clicktar clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. But wouldn't that just result in more injuries and deaths? Exactly, Professor Thornwick nodded. Which is another reason why we know humans could never have existed. No real species would survive long with such self-destructive behavior. The hologram changed again, now showing strange human creations that served no obvious purpose. There were colorful paintings on walls, carved stone figures, and complex patterns made from various materials. Perhaps the most puzzling aspect of human mythology is their supposed creation of art, the professor said. Humans allegedly spent enormous amounts of time and resources creating objects that had no practical function whatsoever. The students looked confused. Most galactic species created only things that were useful for survival, communication, or scientific advancement. These art objects served no purpose for obtaining food, shelter, or protection, Professor Thornwick continued. Yet humans supposedly valued them highly and even traded valuable resources to obtain them. A feathered student spread her wings in bewilderment. But Professor, what was the point? Why make something useless? The myths claim that art was meant to express emotions or create beauty, the professor explained. Humans apparently had such primitive communication that they needed physical objects to share their feelings with others. The hologram now showed humans creating sounds with various instruments. Some held hollow wooden objects with strings, others blew air through metal tubes, and some hit stretched animal skins with sticks. They also created something called music, Professor Thornwick said. This involved making organized noise patterns that somehow conveyed emotions or told stories. The classroom filled with confused murmurs. Sound-based communication was common throughout the galaxy, but the idea of using it purely for emotional expression seemed wasteful and primitive. Music served no survival purpose, the professor continued. Humans would gather in large groups just to listen to these organized sounds. Some even devoted their entire lives to creating music instead of contributing to their society's advancement. Gloophide wobbled uncertainly. Professor, how could a species survive if some members didn't help with important work? They couldn't, Professor Thornwick replied firmly. This is yet another piece of evidence that proves humans were fictional. No real species could afford to have members who contributed nothing to survival. The hologram shifted to show what appeared to be human living spaces. Unlike the clean, efficient designs used by galactic civilizations, human homes were filled with unnecessary objects, decorative items, and spaces devoted entirely to comfort rather than function. Human domestic mythology is equally implausible, the professor said. Their living spaces were supposedly designed for comfort and personal expression, rather than efficiency. They filled their homes with furniture, decorations, and personal belongings that served no practical purpose. A student with tentacles waved one in confusion. But wouldn't that waste valuable space and resources? According to the myths, humans valued individual comfort over community efficiency, Professor Thornwick explained. Each family supposedly had its own separate dwelling, complete with private food preparation areas, waste disposal systems, and recreational spaces. The students found this concept difficult to understand. Most galactic species lived in shared community spaces where resources were distributed according to need and efficiency. The myths even claim that humans kept personal possessions, the professor continued, objects that belonged to specific individuals and could not be used by others, even when those individuals were not using them. This caused another wave of confused chatter among the students. The concept of private ownership was alien to most civilized species. The hologram changed to show the most disturbing images yet. Humans appeared to be deliberately destroying their environment, cutting down forests, polluting waterways, and filling the air with dark smoke. Now we come to the most unbelievable part of human mythology, Professor Thornwick said, his voice becoming serious. According to these stories, humans actually damaged their own planet's ecosystem while they lived on it. The classroom fell silent. The idea of deliberately harming one's own environment was so shocking that many students struggled to process it. The myths claim that humans burned fossil fuels for energy, releasing toxic gases into their atmosphere. The professor continued. They supposedly cut down entire forests to make room for agriculture and cities. They even dumped waste products into their oceans and rivers. Zixtal's crystal body turned dark blue with distress. Professor, wouldn't that poison their own water and air? According to the stories, it did, Professor Thornwick replied. Humans supposedly knew they were damaging their environment but continued anyway because they prioritized short-term convenience over long-term survival. A student with glowing skin dimmed noticeably. How could any intelligent species be so foolish? They couldn't, the professor said definitively. This environmental destruction myth is the ultimate proof that humans never existed. No real species would be stupid enough to poison their own habitat. The hologram now showed supposed human reproduction. Unlike the efficient methods used by civilized species, humans apparently required two different biological variants to combine genetic material through a complex and time-consuming process. Finally, we have the human reproduction myth, Professor Thornwick said. Instead of simple spore distribution or energy transfer, humans supposedly needed male and female variants that had to physically combine genetic material. The students found this concept both amusing and disturbing. Most galactic species could reproduce individually when necessary. This reproduction method was so inefficient that humans could only produce one or two offspring at a time, the professor continued. The process took months to complete and left the female variant unable to contribute fully to society during that period. Clicktar clicked his mandibles skeptically. Professor, wouldn't such an inefficient reproduction system make the species vulnerable to extinction? Absolutely, Professor Thornwick nodded. Which brings us to our conclusion. Every aspect of human mythology describes a species that could not possibly survive in the real universe. They were too weak, too violent, too inefficient, and too self-destructive to exist. Professor Thornwick was about to conclude his lecture when the classroom door suddenly opened with a loud hiss. All heads turned to see Dr. Quenshaw Brightscale entering the room. She was a serpentine alien with beautiful rainbow-colored scales that shimmered as she moved. Her long body curved gracefully as she slithered down the aisle toward the front of the classroom. I apologize for interrupting your lecture, Professor Thornwick, Dr. Brightscale said, her voice carrying a slight hissing sound. But I must respectfully disagree with your conclusions about humans. The classroom erupted in surprised murmurs. Professor Thornwick looked shocked and slightly annoyed at being interrupted during his presentation. Dr. Brightscale, this is highly irregular, Professor Thornwick said stiffly. I am conducting a scheduled lecture about mythological species. That is exactly why I must speak, Dr. Brightscale replied, moving to stand beside the professor. I have spent the last 5 years researching in the Outer Rim territories, and I have discovered evidence that suggests humans may not be mythological at all. The students gasped. Several leaned forward in their seats, suddenly very interested in what was happening. Professor Thornwick's forearms crossed defensively across his chest. That is impossible, Professor Thornwick declared. There is no credible evidence for human existence anywhere in the galaxy. Dr. Brightscale reached into a pouch attached to her body and pulled out a small metal object. She held it up for everyone to see. It was roughly cylindrical with strange markings along its surface. This artifact was found on a dead world in the Kepler system, she announced. Carbon dating shows it is over 2,000 years old, and its design matches exactly the descriptions of human tools found in the mythological texts. Professor Thornwick examined the object closely with 2 of his hands while his other 2 gestured dismissively. This could be from any extinct species. There is nothing specifically human about it. Look at the grip, Dr. Brightscale insisted, pointing to indentations in the metal. It is designed for exactly 5 digits, arranged in the pattern described in human mythology. No known galactic species has hands that would fit this tool perfectly. Several students began whispering excitedly among themselves. Zixtal raised one of her crystal arms. Dr. Brightscale, have you found other evidence? Much more, Dr. Brightscale replied, her scales shifting to a brighter blue color that indicated excitement. I have discovered fragments of spacecraft that use chemical propulsion, exactly as described in the human myths. The metal composition is unknown to our science, and the design principles are completely different from any galactic technology. Professor Thornwick shook his head firmly. Primitive spacecraft could belong to any early civilization. This proves nothing about humans specifically. Dr. Brightscale activated her own holographic display device. Images appeared showing strange wreckage scattered across a barren planet. The debris included twisted metal pieces, circular objects that looked like wheels, and structures that appeared designed for bipedal creatures. These ruins were found on 3 different worlds, Dr. Brightscale explained. All of them show signs of the same technological approach: chemical combustion for energy, metal alloys unknown to current science, and architecture designed for beings approximately 2 meters tall with bipedal locomotion. Gloophigh wobbled nervously. But Dr. Brightscale, couldn't these be from some other extinct species? That is what I thought initially, Dr. Brightscale admitted. But then I discovered this. She pressed another control, and the hologram changed to show a flat rectangular object covered with strange symbols. The symbols appeared to be organized in rows and columns, creating some kind of pattern or message. This appears to be a form of written communication, Dr. Brightscale said. The symbols are completely unlike any known galactic language, but they show clear signs of being a sophisticated communication system. Professor Thornwick studied the symbols carefully. His scientific curiosity was beginning to overcome his skepticism, though he tried to hide it. Even if this is genuine, he said slowly, it could still be from any unknown species. There is nothing that specifically identifies it as human. Actually, there is, Dr. Brightscale replied with obvious satisfaction. She manipulated the holographic controls, and the image zoomed in on a particular section of the writing. Our linguistic computers have been analyzing these symbols for months. They have identified recurring patterns that correspond to mathematical concepts. The hologram now showed equations and number systems written in the strange symbols. The mathematical relationships were clearly visible, even though the symbols themselves were unfamiliar. The mathematics are based on a decimal system, exactly as described in human mythology, Dr. Brightscale continued. More importantly, The equations show understanding of physics principles that match the technological artifacts we have found. A student with feathered wings spoke up nervously. Dr. Brightscale, are you saying that humans actually existed? I'm saying that the evidence strongly suggests an unknown species with characteristics matching human mythology did exist. Dr. Brightscale replied carefully. Whether they were actually called humans or were the same species described in our myths, I cannot say with certainty. Professor Thornwick was becoming more agitated. His silver-blue skin was shifting to a darker shade that indicated stress among his species. Even if some primitive species with these characteristics existed, he argued, that does not mean they survived long enough to develop advanced civilization. The human myths describe behaviors that would lead to rapid extinction. That brings us to the most interesting discovery, Dr. Brightscale said, her scales now glowing with excitement. 3 weeks ago, our deep space monitoring stations detected radio transmissions from an unknown source. The classroom fell completely silent. Radio transmissions meant active, living civilizations. The transmissions are coming from a region of space that we have never fully explored, Dr. Brightscale continued. The signals are organized in patterns that suggest intelligent communication, but they use completely unknown technology and languages. Professor Thornwick's forehands were now trembling slightly. That could be from any undiscovered species in the outer regions. The transmission patterns match the mathematical systems found in the artifacts, Dr. Brightscale said quietly. The same decimal-based mathematics, the same technological principles, the same organizational structures. Several students began talking at once, their voices mixing into an excited babble. Some were frightened by the implications, while others were fascinated by the possibility of discovering a new species. Kliktar raised one of his insect arms for attention. Dr. Brightscale, if humans or human-like beings really exist, where are they? Why haven't we encountered them before? That is an excellent question, Dr. Brightscale replied. The evidence suggests they may be located in regions of space we have classified as too dangerous to explore. Many of the artifacts were found on worlds with extreme environments that would be deadly to most galactic species. Death worlds, whispered Zixtal, her crystal body flashing with fear. Exactly, Dr. Brightscale nodded. If humans or human-like beings exist, they may have evolved on worlds so hostile that we never thought to look for life there. Professor Thornwick was now pacing back and forth, his scientific worldview being challenged in ways he had never expected. Even if all of this is true, he said desperately, it does not change the fundamental impossibility of human survival. Species with the characteristics described in the myths could not survive long enough to develop space travel, unless, Dr. Brightscale said softly, those very characteristics that seem impossible to us are exactly what allowed them to survive in environments where we could not. Before Professor Thornwick could respond, a student in the back row suddenly pointed toward the large windows that looked out into space. Professor, the student called out, what is that bright light moving toward our planet? Everyone turned to look outside. Against the backdrop of stars, a small but growing point of light was indeed approaching their world. It was moving faster than any known spacecraft, and it was heading directly for their academy. Probably just a supply ship, Professor Thornwick said, though his voice lacked conviction. Dr. Brightscale was already activating her communication device, connecting to the Academy's tracking systems. No registered vessels are scheduled to arrive today, she announced, her scales now shifting to colors that indicated both excitement and concern. Whatever that is, it is not in our database. The light was getting brighter and larger. Soon, they could make out that it was indeed some kind of spacecraft, but its design was unlike anything they had ever seen before. Professor Thornwick and Dr. Brightscale looked at each other, both realizing that their academic debate might be about to become very real. The approaching spacecraft grew larger and brighter as it descended toward the academy. Through the classroom windows, everyone could now see that it was made of dull gray metal with strange, angular designs. Bright flames shot out from the back of the vessel exactly like the chemical propulsion systems described in human mythology. Professor Thornwick stood frozen, staring at the impossible sight. His 4 arms hung limply at his sides while his silver-blue skin turned pale with shock. Around the classroom, students whispered nervously to each other in dozens of different languages. "That cannot be real," Professor Thornwick whispered. "Chemical rockets were abandoned by civilized species thousands of years ago." Dr. Brightscale was already connected to the Academy's communication system through her personal device. Her rainbow scale shifted rapidly through different colors as she received updates from the control center. "The vessel is requesting permission to land," she announced to the classroom. "They are broadcasting on primitive radio frequencies and speaking in an unknown language." "What are they saying?" asked Zixtel, her crystal body flashing with nervous energy. Dr. Brightscale listened for a moment to the transmissions being relayed through her device. "The computer is trying to translate, but the language is completely new to our databases. It seems to be some kind of peaceful greeting." The spacecraft was now close enough that they could see details of its construction. It looked rough and crude compared to the smooth, elegant designs of galactic civilization. The metal hull showed signs of wear and damage, as if it had traveled through dangerous conditions for a long time. "Look at how primitive it is," gasped Gloophi. "It looks like it was built in someone's workshop instead of a proper manufacturing facility." Through the classroom's speakers, they could hear the alien transmissions more clearly now. The sounds were strange and harsh, completely unlike the musical tones or telepathic communications used by most galactic species. "Kepler Prime Academy. This is the exploration vessel New Frontier requesting landing permission. We come in peace and seek scientific exchange." Everyone in the classroom jumped. The computer had successfully translated the message into standard galactic language. The voice was rough and aggressive sounding, nothing like the gentle communication styles they were used to. Professor Thornwick finally found his voice. "This must be some kind of elaborate hoax. Perhaps another academy is testing new historical recreation technology." But even as he spoke, he did not sound convinced. The spacecraft was clearly real and following none of the safety protocols used by galactic vessels. It was approaching much too fast and at a dangerous angle. "All students remain calm," announced the Academy's emergency system. "Unknown vessel approaching. This is not a drill." The spacecraft touched down on the Academy's main landing pad with a loud crash and a burst of flame from its engines. Through the windows, they could see other alien students and faculty members gathering around the landing area, keeping a safe distance from the strange vessel. For several minutes, nothing happened. The spacecraft sat silent on the landing pad, while Academy security teams surrounded it with their scanning equipment. The readings they were getting made no sense according to any known technology. Then, with a loud hissing sound, a section of the spacecraft's hull opened like a door. Thick white vapor poured out of the opening, obscuring the view for a moment. When the vapor cleared, two figures emerged from the vessel. The classroom erupted in shocked gasps and screams. Standing on the landing pad were two creatures that looked exactly like the mythical humans described in Professor Thornwick's lecture. They were bipedal, with pale pink skin, small eyes, and only 2 arms and 2 legs. They wore strange protective suits and carried equipment that looked primitive but functional. Professor Thornwick collapsed into his floating chair, his scientific worldview crumbling before his eyes. "Impossible," he whispered. "This cannot be happening." The 2 human figures moved with confident, purposeful steps across the landing pad. Other aliens backed away from them instinctively, unsure whether these legendary creatures were dangerous. The humans seemed completely comfortable in the Academy's environment, adapting to the alien surroundings with surprising ease. One of the humans, a male with short brown hair, looked around the gathering crowd with alert, calculating eyes. His posture was straight and confident, showing no fear despite being surrounded by dozens of alien species. The other human was a female with longer hair, and she was already examining the alien architecture and technology with obvious scientific interest. Dr. Brightscale was the first to recover from the shock. Her scales shifted to bright colors of excitement and curiosity as she activated the classroom's external communication system. "This is Dr. Quenshaw Brightscale from the Academy of Xenobiology," she broadcast toward the landing pad. "Welcome to Kepler Prime. Can you understand our communications?" The male human touched a device attached to his ear and spoke into a small microphone. "We can understand you through our translation equipment. I am Commander Jake Morrison, and this is Dr. Lisa Hoffman. We are representatives of the human species from the planet Earth. The classroom fell completely silent. Even the usually chattering students were too shocked to speak. The mythical species they had been laughing about an hour ago was now standing outside their window, introducing themselves calmly and professionally. Jake Morrison continued speaking, his voice carrying easily through the communication system. We have been observing your galactic civilization for several months now. We detected your educational broadcasts and found Professor Thornwick's lecture about our species particularly interesting. Professor Thornwick made a choking sound. The humans had been listening to his lecture about them being mythical creatures. Dr. Lisa Hoffman stepped forward and spoke into her own communication device. We apologize for arriving unannounced, but we wanted to make formal contact with your academic institution. We believe there is much we can learn from each other. Her voice was gentler than Jake's, but carried the same confident tone. Neither human showed any sign of being intimidated by the crowd of alien species surrounding them. How did you find us? Dr. Brightscale asked, her scientific curiosity overcoming her shock. We developed faster-than-light travel using gravitational manipulation technology, Lisa replied matter-of-factly. Our exploration vessels have been mapping this region of the galaxy for the past year. The students began whispering frantically among themselves. Gravitational manipulation was a theoretical concept that galactic scientists had been trying to master for centuries. Jake Morrison was scanning the crowd of aliens with practiced eyes, noting their positions, technology, and potential threat levels. It was clear that his military background made him automatically assess any new situation for tactical advantages and vulnerabilities. We have already identified your planetary defense systems, Jake announced casually. Your energy shields have a rotating frequency that cycles every 3.7 seconds, and your weapon platforms have blind spots in the northern approach vectors. The crowd of aliens stepped back nervously. This human had analyzed their military defenses, in the few minutes since arriving, something that should have been impossible for any unknown species. Lisa elbowed Jake gently and spoke into her communicator. What my colleague means is that we have studied your technology with great interest. We noticed that your defensive systems are designed to stop energy-based attacks but might be vulnerable to kinetic projectiles. Professor Thornwick found his voice again, though it came out as a croak. How long have you been watching us? Long enough to learn your languages and understand your social structures, Jake replied. We always observe new civilizations carefully before making contact. It is safer for everyone involved. Dr. Brightscale's scales were now cycling through rapid color changes as she processed the implications. You said you are from Earth. Is that really a death world as described in the myths? Lisa laughed, a sound that made several aliens jump, in surprise. Earth is quite dangerous by galactic standards, yes. We have predators, natural disasters, diseases, and environmental hazards that most species would find deadly. How do you survive there? Asked Zixtal, her crystal body flashing with curiosity. We adapt, Jake said simply. Humans are very good at adapting to dangerous situations. As if to prove his point, Jake had already memorized the layout of the academy, identified the exits, and calculated the best defensive positions, all while maintaining a casual conversation. His tactical awareness was operating constantly in the background, a survival trait that peaceful galactic species had never needed to develop. The two humans stood confidently on the alien landing pad, representing a species that the galaxy had dismissed as impossible myths, now revealed to be very real and surprisingly capable. 3 hours after the humans landed, the Academy was in complete chaos. News of first contact with the mythical human species had spread across the galaxy faster than anyone thought possible. Communication channels were flooded with messages, from government officials, scientists, and military leaders, all demanding information about the impossible visitors. Professor Thornwick sat in his office, staring blankly at the wall. His entire career had been built on studying mythical species, and now the most famous myth of all was walking around his academy, asking questions and making observations that challenged everything he thought he knew about the universe. Dr. Brightscale had taken charge of the situation with impressive efficiency. She was currently in the main conference room with Jake Morrison and Lisa Hoffman, conducting the first formal interview between humans and galactic civilization. The conversation was being recorded and broadcast live to scientific institutions across the galaxy. "So you are telling us that Earth really is as dangerous as the myths describe?" Dr. Brightscale asked, her scales shifting to colors of fascination and concern. Lisa nodded while examining a piece of alien technology with obvious curiosity. "Earth has predators that hunt in coordinated packs, weather systems that can destroy entire cities, diseases that can kill millions, and natural disasters that reshape continents. Most galactic species would not survive there for very long. How did humans become the dominant species on such a world?" Dr. Brightscale continued. Jake answered while simultaneously watching the room's exits and noting the positions of everyone present. "We learned to work together, make tools, and adapt faster than our environment could kill us. When something threatened us, we either found a way to defeat it or we learned to live with it." In the main classroom, the students who had attended Professor Thornwick's lecture were still trying to process what they had witnessed. Zixtal's crystal body was cycling through confused color patterns as she spoke with her classmates. "They really do everything the professor said was impossible," she whispered to Gloophai. "They survive on a death world. They use chemical technology. They even pack bond with predators. Did you see how that Jake human was watching everyone?" Gloophai wobbled nervously. He was tracking every movement like he expected an attack at any moment. "And the female human started understanding our technology just by looking at it," added Clicktar. "She figured out how our holographic projectors work in minutes." Meanwhile, in the conference room, Lisa was demonstrating exactly that ability. She had connected her portable computer to the Academy's systems and was already accessing their scientific databases. "Your gravitational manipulation theory is very interesting," Lisa said, reading through research papers at incredible speed. "But you are approaching it backwards. Instead of trying to create artificial gravity, you should focus on manipulating existing gravitational fields." Dr. Brightscale watched in amazement as Lisa began drawing equations on the room's display screen. The mathematics were unlike anything in galactic science, but they were clearly more advanced than current theories. "How do you know this?" Dr. Brightscale asked. "Humans had to develop different approaches to physics because we started from a death world," Lisa explained. "We could not rely on stable environments, so we learned to work with chaotic systems instead of against them." Jake was conducting his own informal demonstration by discussing defensive strategies with Academy security personnel. Within an hour, he had identified 17 ways that hostile forces could infiltrate the Academy and suggested improvements to their security systems. "Your energy barriers are impressive," Jake told the security chief, "but you have no backup plans if they fail. On Earth, we learned that any system can break, so you always need multiple layers of protection." The security chief, a large insectoid alien, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "These backup systems would require significant changes to our procedures. Change is survival," Jake replied simply. "Species that cannot adapt to new situations do not survive long on dangerous worlds." Word of the humans' capabilities spread quickly through the Academy. Within hours, professors from every department were requesting meetings with the visitors. The humans' unique perspectives were providing solutions to problems that galactic scientists had been struggling with for decades. In the biology department, Lisa worked with researchers to understand how Earth's extreme evolution had produced such adaptable life forms. Her explanations of human immune systems, healing factors, and stress responses amazed alien scientists whose species had never faced such evolutionary pressures. "Humans can survive injuries that would kill most galactic species," Lisa explained to a group of medical researchers. "Our bodies are designed to keep functioning even when severely damaged." "How is that possible?" asked a jellyfish-like researcher whose species simply regrew damaged parts. "Pain tolerance, adrenaline responses, and redundant biological systems," Lisa replied. "When humans are threatened, our bodies automatically increase strength, speed, and pain resistance. We call it the fight-or-flight response." In the engineering department, Jake was working with technology specialists to understand human spacecraft design. Their primitive-looking vessels were actually far more advanced than they appeared. Chemical rockets are inefficient for normal space travel, Jake admitted, but they work in any environment. Our ships can function in gravity wells, electromagnetic storms, radiation fields, and other conditions that would disable more advanced vessels. But surely you have developed more sophisticated propulsion systems, suggested a crystalline engineer. Jake smiled, an expression that made several aliens step back nervously. We have several types of faster-than-light drives, including the gravitational manipulation system Lisa mentioned. But we still carry chemical rockets as backup systems because they never fail when you need them most. The implications of human technology and capabilities were causing serious discussions in government circles across the galaxy. If humans were as adaptable and resourceful as they appeared, they could potentially solve many problems that had plagued galactic civilization for centuries. However, some species were concerned about the military implications. Humans had evolved as apex predators on a death world, and their natural abilities could make them dangerous if they chose to be hostile. Dr. Brightscale addressed these concerns during a private meeting with Academy leadership and government representatives. The humans show no signs of aggressive intentions, she reported. They appear genuinely interested in peaceful scientific exchange. However, their natural capabilities are indeed formidable. What do you mean? Asked the Academy director, a wise old alien with multiple brains. They think strategically about everything, Dr. Brightscale explained. Jake Morrison has already analyzed our entire planet's defensive capabilities just through casual observation. Lisa Hoffman has integrated our scientific databases with her own research and identified improvements to dozens of our current projects. Are they a threat? The director asked directly. Dr. Brightscale considered the question carefully. They could be, if they chose to be, but they seem more interested in cooperation than conquest. They view us as potential allies and teachers rather than enemies or prey. Back in his office, Professor Thornwick was slowly coming to terms with the new reality. He activated his communication system and began composing a message to academic institutions across the galaxy. To my colleagues in xenobiology and related fields, he began, I must formally retract my previous conclusions about human mythology. Humans are not only real, but they represent a completely new category of intelligent life that we must study and understand. He paused, thinking about everything he had witnessed that day. I am establishing a new research program focused on death world species and their unique evolutionary adaptations. If humans exist, there may be other species in unexplored regions who have developed similar capabilities through survival in extreme environments. As Professor Thornwick sent his message, Jake and Lisa were concluding their first day of contact with galactic civilization. They had successfully established peaceful relations, shared valuable scientific knowledge, and demonstrated that humans could be valuable allies to the galactic community. How do you think this went? Lisa asked Jake as they prepared to return to their ship. Jake surveyed the Academy one more time, his tactical mind automatically noting changes in security positions and alien behavior patterns. Better than expected, he replied. They are curious, rather than hostile, and they seem to appreciate what we can offer. I think humans and the galaxy are going to have a very interesting future together. Outside their ship, dozens of alien students and faculty members had gathered to watch the humans depart. The mythical species was real, and everything about galactic civilization was about to change.